I was a tired truck driver, pushing through a brutal storm to make an impossible deadline. I stopped to help a family stranded on the side of the road, towing a car for free, an act that got me written up and docked pay by my boss. 2 weeks later, I was called into the head office, certain I was about to be fired. But when I walked in, the same man I had rescued from the storm was sitting there, and he had just bought the entire company. Before we hit the road, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head out into that storm. The rain was coming down in sheets, a solid, gray wall of water that the wipers on my 18-wheeler could barely keep at bay. It was 2 in the morning, somewhere in the middle of a desolate stretch of highway in rural Pennsylvania, and I was in a race against time. My boss, a man named Davis, whose personality was as pleasant as a patch of black ice, had made it brutally clear when I'd left the depot. "This delivery is time-sensitive, Finn," he had barked over the phone. "No excuses, no delays. I want that truck in the Chicago depot by 5 a.m. or don't bother coming in tomorrow." In the world of long-haul trucking, a threat like that wasn't a joke. It was a promise. I was a good driver, one of the best, but in Davis's eyes, I was just a number, an asset, and a disposable one at that. I was pushing my rig as hard as I dared on the slick, treacherous asphalt, my eyes burning from staring into the hypnotic, rhythmic pulse of the wipers. My mind was a weary soup of fuel gauges, deadlines, and the quiet, gnawing anxiety of the bills waiting for me at home. I was a good man, in a hard job, just trying to make it to the next sunrise. It was in this state of exhausted, hyper-focused tunnel vision that I saw them. A flicker of weak, struggling hazard lights a quarter-mile ahead on the shoulder of the highway. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a dark-colored SUV, its hood up, completely dead in the water, a sitting duck in the middle of a biblical downpour. Standing beside it, soaked to the bone, was a man, desperately trying to flag me down. My first instinct, the one conditioned by years of my boss's relentless pressure, was to keep going. "Not your problem," a voice that sounded a lot like Davis whispered in my head. "You stop, you're late. You're late, you're fired. Just keep driving." The company policy was absolute. No one authorized stops. It was a liability. It was a waste of time. I was about to move to the left lane to give them a wide berth when my headlights swept across the inside of their vehicle, and I saw them. In the back seat was a woman, her face pressed against the glass, and in a car seat beside her was a small child, no older than 5 or 6. A family, stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, in the worst storm of the year. With a curse and a groan of resignation at my own conscience, I hit the air brakes, the powerful pssh sound cutting through the roar of the storm. My massive rig slowed, pulling over onto the shoulder 100 feet in front of them. I threw on my own rain gear and jumped out into the deluge. The man, who I could now see was in his 50s, with a kind, tired face, ran up to me, shouting over the wind. "Our engine just died, no power at all, and my cell phone has no signal out here." "Get back in the car with your family and stay warm. I'll take a look." I knew it was a lost cause. The car was a new model, and it was completely dead. This wasn't a simple fix. They needed a tow. A tow that in a storm like this wouldn't arrive for hours, if at all. I walked back to him. "The engine is flooded, sir. You're not going anywhere in this tonight." I saw the look of pure, desperate panic in his eyes as he looked back at his wife and child in the car. And I made a choice that I knew, with an absolute certainty, was going to cost me my job. "I can't leave you here," I said. "I'll tow you to the next town. There's a motel there. It's about 20 miles down the road." I can't ask you to do that," he said, shaking his head. "You have a deadline, a delivery to make." "Some deliveries," I said, are more important than others. The next 20 minutes were a blur of cold, wet, and heavy work. I got my own heavy-duty tow chains from my toolbox and, with the man's help, I hooked his SUV securely to the back of my rig. Finally, we were on our way. My truck now moving at a slow, careful crawl, the dead weight of the family I had just adopted pulling me from behind. We drove in a comfortable silence. The only communication the occasional, crackling check-in over the CB radio I had told him to use from his car. When we finally, mercifully pulled into the bright, welcoming lights of a small motel off the next exit, it was almost 4 in the morning. After I had unhooked his car, the father, whose name I now knew was Warren, came to the window of my cab. He pulled out a wet, crumpled wallet. "I don't have much cash on me," he said, trying to push a handful of bills through my window. "But please, let me pay for your time, for your fuel." I looked at the money and then at his tired, grateful face. "No, sir," I said, pushing his hand gently away. "You just get your family inside and get them safe and warm. That's all that matters. Have a safe trip." He just looked at me for a long moment, his eyes, which were sharp and intelligent, seeming to see right through me. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of a quiet, profound sincerity. He offered me his hand. "I will not forget this, son." We shook, a firm, solid handshake between two men in the pouring rain. I watched them disappear into the safety of the motel lobby, a warm feeling of a job well done in my chest. A feeling that immediately turned to ice as I finally looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was 4:15 a.m. I was over 200 miles from my destination, and my delivery was due in Chicago in 45 minutes from now. I was not just late, I was catastrophically, unforgivably, and career-endingly late. The rest of the drive was a long, lonely, and deeply stressful journey. The storm finally broke as the sun began to rise, painting the wet gray sky in shades of a bruised watercolor pink. When I finally, exhaustedly pulled my rig into the bustling Chicago depot, it was just after 9 in the morning, a full 4 hours after my deadline. The other drivers, the guys on the morning shift, just looked at me with a kind of weary, pitying sympathy. They knew my boss, Mr. Davis. They knew what was coming. I didn't have to wait long. Before I had even finished unhitching my trailer, my phone buzzed with a text from him. It was 2 words. "My office. Now." Davis's office was a small, messy, and joyless cube that smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. He was a man whose own mid-level management failures were a constant, simmering rage that he expertly redirected at the drivers under his command. He was sitting behind his cluttered desk, a large, balding man with a perpetually flushed, angry face, and he didn't even offer me a seat. "You're 6 hours late, Finn," he began, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He had calculated the time from when I should have checked in. 6 hours. The penalty clause in the contract for this delivery was $5,000 an hour. You have just, with your little joyride, personally cost this company $30,000. Do you have anything at all to say for yourself before I fire you and have you blacklisted from every logistics firm in the country? I stood before his desk, tired, wet, and bone-weary, but my conscience was clear. I told him the truth. I told him about the storm, about the SUV on the side of the road, about the family with the small child inside. I told him about the lack of cell service, about the fact that a tow truck would not have reached them for hours. I made a judgment call, Mr. Davis, I concluded, my voice steady. There was a family in danger. I couldn't just leave them there. Davis just stared at me for a long, silent moment, and then he laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was a short, sharp, and utterly mirthless bark of a laugh. "A judgment call?" he sneered. Let me tell you something, Finn. I don't pay you to make judgment calls. I don't pay you to be a hero. I don't pay you to run a charity tow service for every sad sack who runs their car into a ditch." He leaned forward, his face now a mask of pure, ugly rage. "I pay you to get a 30-ton rig full of high-value electronics from point A to point B on time and without excuses. That is the beginning and that is the end of your job description." He was right. Of course, from a purely corporate logistical standpoint, I had failed. But from a human standpoint, I knew, with an absolute and unshakable certainty, that I had done the right thing. And that was a truth that his anger could not touch. I just stood there, in a quiet, dignified silence, and I let him rage. I accepted my fate. But he didn't fire me. He did something worse, something more humiliating. "You're not worth the paperwork of firing right now," he spat, his voice full of a dismissive contempt. "But here's what is going to happen. The $30,000 late fee is coming out of this depot's budget, which means it is coming out of my hide. So I'm going to take it out of yours. I am suspending you for 1 week without pay. And this," he said, scribbling furiously on a formal disciplinary form, "is a final written warning. One more mistake, Finn, one more unauthorized stop, one more missed deadline, and you are gone. For good." He shoved the form at me. "Now get out of my office." I walked out of that depot, my head held high, my dignity intact, but my wallet and my future significantly lighter. The week of my suspension was a quiet, stressful, and deeply demoralizing time. I spent my days looking for other jobs, my 1-week suspension a black mark that was difficult to explain. I began to think that Davis had won, that my one small act of kindness had, in the end, cost me everything.
It was on the Friday of that long, lonely week that the email arrived. It was from the corporate head office, from a name I didn't recognize, the executive assistant to the company's CEO. The email was brief, formal, and terrifying. It was a summons. I and my regional manager, Mr. Davis, were to report to the CEO's office in New York City on Monday morning for a formal review of the incident. I stared at the email, my heart pounding in my chest. A meeting with the CEO in New York. This was it. This was the final nail in the coffin. Davis had clearly not been satisfied with just suspending me. He had escalated it. He was making an example of me. He was making sure I was not just fired, but publicly and corporately executed by the highest power in the company. I had 2 days to prepare for the end of my career. The 2-day bus ride to New York City was a long, slow, and deeply demoralizing journey towards my own execution. I spent the time staring out the window at the blur of the American landscape, the country I had spent my life crisscrossing in the lonely solitude of my truck's cab. I thought about my career, about the thousands of on-time deliveries, the years of hard, honest work, and I thought about how all of it was about to be erased because of a single simple act of human decency. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. I had played the game, and I had lost. I had accepted my fate. I arrived at the corporate headquarters of Freightline Logistics an hour early. It was a place I had only ever seen in company newsletters, a gleaming 50-story tower of glass and steel on Park Avenue. It was a different universe from the gritty, diesel-fumed world of the depots and the highways I knew. I felt like a stranger in a foreign land. I found my boss, Mr. Davis, waiting for me in the opulent marble-floored lobby of the executive suite on the top floor. He was wearing his best ill-fitting suit, and he looked nervous, but also smug, like a small petty tyrant who was about to be rewarded by the king. "Well, Finn," he said, a look of false sympathy on his face, "looks like your little hero act finally caught up to you. It's a real shame." He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Just a piece of friendly advice. When we go in there, you keep your mouth shut. You say nothing. Let me do all the talking. I'll tell the CEO you're a good driver who just made a bad judgment call. Maybe, if we're lucky, I can convince them to just let you go with a severance package instead of blacklisting you from the industry." He was pretending to be on my side, a final pathetic little power play. I just nodded, too tired to even argue. A moment later, a polite, professional executive assistant opened the grand double doors to the CEO's office. "Mr. Davis, Mr. Riley, they're ready for you now." We walked in. The office was vast, a cavern of quiet, intimidating power, with a view of Central Park that was probably worth more than my entire lifetime of earnings. The CEO, a formidable, silver-haired man in his late 60s, sat behind a desk the size of a small car, and in a large, comfortable-looking leather armchair to the side of the desk sat another man. My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt and spin. It was the man from the storm. He was not the wet, cold, and desperate-looking man I had pulled from the side of the highway. He was dressed in a sharp, incredibly expensive-looking suit. His face was calm and composed, and his eyes, those same sharp, intelligent eyes I remembered, held a look of quiet, knowing amusement. It was him, Mr. Warren.
My boss, Davis, who had never seen the man before, just shot him an annoyed, dismissive glance, clearly irritated that a stranger was present at this important private meeting. The CEO stood up. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice a calm, serious baritone, "thank you for coming all this way. We have called this meeting to conduct a formal review of the incident from 2 weeks ago involving the late delivery of the Apex Electronics shipment to Chicago." Davis nodded eagerly, puffing out his chest, ready to deliver his well-rehearsed speech about my incompetence and his own decisive management. "But before we begin," the CEO continued, "I have a very important introduction to make." He gestured to the man in the armchair. "Gentlemen, I would like you to meet Mr. Michael Warren. As of last month, Mr. Warren's private investment firm, North Star Capital, completed a quiet majority share acquisition of this company." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "He is our new owner and the new chairman of the board." I watched, in a state of pure, surreal, and dreamlike shock, as every drop of blood drained from Mr. Davis's face. His smug, confident expression did not just fade, it collapsed, imploding in on itself, replaced by a mask of pure, abject, and soul-shattering horror. He finally, truly looked at the man in the chair, and I could see the moment in his eyes when the memory of my own report from 2 weeks ago, the story of the stranded motorist he had mocked and punished me for helping, came flooding catastrophically back to him. He looked from Mr. Warren to me and back again, his mouth opening and closing like fish, a series of small, strangled, and pathetic sounds escaping his lips. The new owner of the company, the chairman of the board, my passenger from that rainy night, then spoke for the very first time. His voice was the same calm, grateful, and deeply sincere tone I remembered from the storm. He looked past the CEO. He looked past the terrified, pale, and trembling ruin of my boss, Mr. Davis, and his eyes, full of a quiet, knowing amusement, landed directly on me. "Finn," he said, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face, "I believe you and I have met. We have some business to discuss." He then paused, and his smile vanished, his expression becoming one of cold, hard, and absolute authority as he turned his gaze upon Mr. Davis. "But first," he said, his voice like ice, "I believe you owe my friend here an apology." I stood in the vast, silent office of the CEO, my heart hammering against my ribs, a strange electric current of disbelief and a dawning impossible hope coursing through my veins. The man from the storm, Mr. Warren, the new owner of the entire company, had just called me his friend. and he had just demanded an apology from my boss, Mr. Davis. Davis, who had been a smug, confident predator just moments before, now looked like a cornered, terrified animal. He stared at Mr. Warren, his mind clearly struggling to process the catastrophic reversal of his own fortune. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "I am waiting, Mr. Davis," Warren said, his voice a low, quiet, and incredibly dangerous rumble. Davis finally jerkily turned to me. His eyes, which had always held a look of bored, dismissive contempt, were now wide with a frantic, pleading terror. "Finn," he stammered, his voice a pathetic, strangled squeak, I apologize. It was a misunderstanding, a matter of company policy. I had no idea, sir, of the circumstances. I am so very sorry if I was harsh."
It was the weak, insincere, and utterly worthless apology of a man who was not sorry for what he had done, but terrified of the consequences. Mr. Warren did not seem impressed. He just looked at Davis with a look of profound and deeply disappointed disgust. "Harsh, Mr. Davis?" he repeated, his voice like ice. "No. You were not harsh. You were a petty tyrant, a small man in a small office, drunk on a tiny amount of power, who chose to punish a good man for an act of profound and selfless compassion." He stood up from his chair and walked slowly, deliberately, to the grand window that overlooked the city. "I have spent the last 2 weeks, since my encounter with Mr. Riley," he said, using my last name for the first time, a small but significant gesture of respect, "doing a very deep and very thorough dive into the culture of this company I have just acquired." He turned back to face us. "I have read the anonymous employee reviews for your Chicago depot, Mr. Davis. I have seen the abysmal turnover rates. I have seen the formal complaints that have been filed against you and then quietly buried. I have read the reports of your management style." He took a step towards my now visibly trembling boss. "You have fostered a culture of fear, Mr. Davis," he said, his voice now a low, furious whisper. "A culture that values deadlines over decency. A culture that would have one of its drivers, in good conscience, leave a family with a small child stranded to die in a deadly storm for the sake of a shipping contract." He shook his head. "That is not a culture of efficiency, Mr. Davis. That is a culture of profound and unforgivable moral bankruptcy." He walked back to the desk and looked at the now former CEO, who just nodded grimly. The verdict had been decided. "That is not how my company will be run," Mr. Warren said, his voice now a final, clear command. "And you, sir," he looked directly at Davis, "will not be a part of it. As of this moment, your employment with Freightline Logistics is terminated, effective immediately. You may return to Chicago to clear out your desk. Security," he said with a nod to the door, "will escort you from the building." Davis just collapsed into a chair, a broken, defeated man, his face in his hands, as 2 large, impassive security guards entered the room. And then, with the wreckage of my old boss's career still littering the expensive carpet, Mr. Warren turned his full and now much warmer attention to me. "Finn," he said, a small, wry smile on his face, "I seem to have a problem. I now have a major regional depot in Chicago, one of our most important hubs, without a manager." I just stared at him, my mind unable to process the speed at which my world was changing. "I need someone to run it," he continued, his eyes now full of a serious, challenging light. "I need someone who understands that our most important assets are not our trucks or our contracts or our delivery schedules. I need someone who understands that our most important asset is the good, decent, and hard-working people who drive for us. I need someone who knows when to follow the company policy, and when it is right and just and necessary to break it. He stood over and stood directly in front of me. I need someone with character, son. Someone like you. The job of Regional Operations Manager for the Chicago Depot is yours, if you want it. I was speechless. I was in a state of pure, vertiginous shock. A regional manager. Me. A man who just an hour ago had been absolutely certain he was about to be fired and blacklisted from the only industry he had ever known.
"Sir, Mr. Warren," I stammered, my voice a weak, disbelieving thing. I'm just a driver. I don't know the first thing about management. I don't have a college degree. He held up a hand, silencing me. A real, genuine, and deeply kind smile spread across his face. "You know how to treat people with respect, Finn. You know how to make a tough call under pressure. You know how to put a human life ahead of a profit margin. That," he said, "is the only part of management that cannot be taught. Everything else," he clapped me firmly on the shoulder, "I will teach you myself. Your training starts on Monday." I stood there in the billionaire's office, my head spinning, my entire life rewritten in the space of 10 unbelievable minutes. An hour ago, I was a dead man walking, a broke and soon-to-be unemployed truck driver. Now, I was a regional operations manager, with the most powerful and most decent man in the entire industry as my personal mentor. The worst day of my career had just, impossibly and beautifully, become the very first day of the rest of my life. I walked out of that gleaming 50-story tower on Park Avenue, a man completely untethered from the life I had known just an hour before. My old boss, Davis, was gone, a ghost, escorted out a side door by security. The old CEO shook my hand with a look of newfound, profound respect. And my new boss, the new chairman of the board, the man from the storm, Mr. Warren, just clapped me on the shoulder one last time. "See you in Chicago on Monday, Finn. We have a company to rebuild." The bus ride back to Chicago was a journey through a dream. I wasn't staring out the window at a bleak, uncertain future anymore. I was looking at the landscape of my country, and for the first time, I felt like I had a real stake in it. I held the crisp new business card in my hand, the one that read, "Finn Riley, Regional Operations Manager." It didn't feel real. When I walked into the Chicago Depot on Monday morning, the atmosphere was a toxic cocktail of fear and resentment. The news of Davis's sudden, spectacular firing had spread like wildfire. The other drivers looked at me with a mixture of awe and deep suspicion. They didn't know the whole story. They just knew that the quiet guy, Finn, had gone to New York and had somehow come back as the king. My first act as the new manager was not to move into Davis's old, messy office. It was to walk out onto the depot floor, gather every single driver, every mechanic, every dispatcher, and I told them the truth. I told them the entire unbelievable story. I told them about the storm, the stranded family, the tow, the punishment, and I told them about the new owner, a man who had been on the receiving end of a single, simple act of kindness and had decided to build his entire corporate philosophy around it. "The old way of doing things is over," I told them, my voice echoing in the vast, diesel-fumed space. "This depot will no longer be run on a foundation of fear and impossible deadlines. It will be run on a foundation of respect. We are not cogs in a machine, we are a team, and we will look out for each other." The change was not immediate. There was still suspicion. But slowly, day by day, we began to build something new. I didn't manage from behind a desk. I was on the floor, in the trucks, turning wrenches with the mechanics. I knew their struggles because they had been my struggles, and I fought for them. I renegotiated our deadlines with corporate to be more realistic. I instituted a new bonus system based on safety and vehicle maintenance, not just speed.
And I implemented a new company-wide policy, one that was approved with a single enthusiastic phone call from Mr. Warren himself. It was called the Good Samaritan Rule. It stated, simply, that any driver who was late due to a verified act of stopping to help a person in distress on the road would not be punished, but would, in fact, receive a bonus on their next paycheck. It was a revolution, and it worked. Our depot, which had once had the worst turnover rate in the entire company, became the one everyone wanted to transfer to. Our safety record became the best in the nation, and our profits, ironically, soared. I saw Mr. Warren once a month. He would fly in for our regional meetings, but he would always spend an extra day with me. He was not just my boss, he had become my mentor, my friend, and the closest thing to a father I had had since my own had passed away. He taught me about business, about leadership, and I, in my own quiet way, taught him about the lives of the men and women who were the true engine of his new empire. It's been a year now. I am sitting in my new office, a clean, bright space with a large window that overlooks the bustling depot yard. It is not a place of fear anymore. It is a place of pride. My wife and my daughter have a new home, a new life, a future that is secure and full of a hope I had once thought was lost forever. On my desk, framed, is a photograph. It's a picture of a gleaming, dark-colored SUV parked safely in front of a small roadside motel with a massive 18-wheeler truck parked protectively beside it, its lights glowing in the pouring rain. Mr. Warren had sent it to me a few weeks after our first meeting. He had gotten it from the motel's security camera footage. Underneath the photo, he had had a small, simple brass plaque inscribed. It didn't mention money, or power, or business. It just said, "Character is who you are when you think no one is watching. Thank you for being a man of character, Finn." I had been a simple, tired truck driver who had made a choice on a dark and stormy night, a choice to put a stranger's family ahead of my own career. I had had no idea that in doing so, I was not just saving them, I was saving myself. And in the process, I had been given a new and far more important delivery to make, a delivery of hope, of respect, and of a simple, profound, and desperately needed human kindness to every corner of the new world I had been given the honor to help build.
An absolutely powerful story about how a single act of kindness can start a revolution. What a testament to Finn's character and Mr. Warren's vision. What do you think of the Good Samaritan rule Finn implemented? Let us know in the comments below. If you were inspired by this incredible story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more uplifting stories of karma and justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.